tried to free your mind, Nia, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it. You have to let it all go, Nia. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.
This is the Mind is Mine podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, episode 8. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome back. Funny little story. For the first 12 minutes of, my visuals here, we were just yapping and didn't even hit record at all. So we've set a little foundation for what we were going to talk about. But I just wanted to throw that out there because that was a funny little whoopsies on my part. But I want to go ahead and give you the floor and introduce yourself, my man Raymond, a very knowledgeable individual. So,
I said it last time, man. I don't know if knowledgeable is an accurate depiction. I know a little about a lot. I just read a lot. I got interest in a variety of subjects. But if that makes me wise, I don't know. It hasn't shown up in my life, but maybe sometime in the future. But yeah, my name's Raymond. We work together at Edge Fitness. I'm a personal trainer there. Started personal training full time about a year and a half ago, but I've been training for about 2.5 years. I think my story of how I got into it is like most people. I just started working out myself. It became such a big part of my life. I wanted to know how I could take this and turn it into a living, a way of life. And, I've seen really good results so far, and I'm glad I've been able to help some people here and there. For sure.
Let's dive back into what we were talking about before I realized we weren't recording. But to pick it back up, we were talking about the premise of masculinity and how that is related to physical performance, but also at the same time with certain political structures and certain structures of what the culture looks like and where we're heading right now. It ultimately seems like masculinity in a way is being deteriorated and being attacked upon. So back to what we were talking about, I wanted to throw that question back out there is how do you, as a personal trainer and who works on physical performance and also is in tune and also studies about the positives and even the negatives of masculinity and testosterone and how we can balance that. How do you approach that with your clients, especially in the state of the world and the state of masculinity and its perspective behind it?
Well, I think a big part of personal training is just taking people where they're at. People have different goals. People have different perspective on stuff. So usually I won't get too deep into the more esoteric parts of masculinity, how it relates to personal training until I can kind of get that vibe from the person. I do think it's interesting, though. They've done a lot of research recently about testosterone and how fundamentally testosterone, it makes effort and difficult things enjoyable. The gratification you get from accomplishing a task, physical or otherwise, is driven by testosterone. I think that's really interesting because fundamentally that's what a big part of what masculinity is to me. Getting shit done.
Yeah, 100%. Very well. That was a very good answer. I like that. But we were talking about a brave new world and how you can deteriorate somebody through pleasure and convenience. And I do believe that has been the main attack on masculinity is constantly feeding people, whether man or woman, and especially children, distractions and things that constantly get our dopamine moving, and to the point where we always want to, where we feel unwell if we don't have it, or we don't feel in tune with ourselves if we don't have this product. Or whatever it may be. It doesn't even have to be a product. It can be a service or a certain act that we commit that's just so infectious, I guess you would say.
I really feel bad for the next generation coming up because, we think we have it hard, but man, they don't stand a chance. You have kids nowadays that are born practically with an iPad in their hand, scrolling through TikTok. They're developing addictions before they're even to an age where their brain is developed, where they can make choices about, do I want my life to be in front of a screen? Or, it's so easy to fall into traps of addictions, whether it's nicotine, caffeine, social media, or anything else. I don't think you should be exposed to those things at too young of an age.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big process of that, is removing yourself from the things in your life. Like you were talking about the book you're reading. What is it called? Buddha in the Mirror?
Yeah, The Buddha in Your Mirror. Just basically saying that you and the Buddha are one. Like there's no separation, no sense of division at all between you and Buddhahood. That lies within every single person.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, but a fundamental tenet of Buddhism is the attachment that you have to things. The more attachment you have, the more potential for suffering there is. Because say you love a person or you care deeply about a person, you're attached to them. When you're with them, you are afraid of losing them. That's a negative emotion. When you're separated from them, you feel anxiety about getting back to them. And when you lose them, you feel loss or despair because you don't have them anymore. So, and that's just one thing, that everyone has dealt with through history. But nowadays there's so many more addictions that everyone has through. I mean, everyone's experienced separation anxiety from their phone.
Yeah.
You lose it for 5 minutes.
For sure. And I mean, at the gym too, it's like, if you don't go into the gym without your headphones, let alone your phone, then it's like, it's an issue. Like for me, I can't work out, at least at where we're at, without headphones, because I personally don't like our soundtrack. No offense to The Edge. It's just, I'm not a fan of the mixing, which we'll get back to music in a second. But I don't feel at my best if I don't have my headphones or my phone around for me to like lock into the music, because the music really brings that pump and gets me locked into that. Now, if I'm in an environment where there's no music at all, I can definitely work out without any music. It's just there, but I've seen worse, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we're all to different degrees experiencing augmented reality. Very few of us go through an entire day just experiencing the day. We're working out, we're listening to music during it. We're going on a walk, we're listening to music, listening to a podcast. And those things aren't bad individually, but being unable to enjoy reality without augmenting it, adding something to it, whether it's visual stimulation, sound, a soundtrack in the background, or something more direct like drug use or something like that. That's fundamentally bad, I think. It makes you discontent as a person. And, I think there's too many of those things nowadays. Like I was saying earlier, that especially the new generation doesn't even have a chance to make those choices for themselves. They're born with those addictions.
One thing I'm blessed that I went through is during COVID, I still had like my brothers around, and it really took a lot of time away from screens to be around with them. And also I was doing DoorDash during the day. So it was like, I didn't want to sit at home and just dive into my phone or dive into technology too much to the point where I lose myself, because I was starting to hear early on about the issues of people staying in the house and just constantly looking at screens, and just how that will affect you going forward in your life. I'm blessed that I didn't get a phone until I was in 8th grade. My brothers got it a little sooner. I guess that's the product of being the firstborn. But I'm actually blessed that I delayed that certain type of gratification and the ability to have that phone, and also not get deeper into like the TikTok stage during 2020, because I see a bunch of people now that just don't like going outside anymore. They rather just take that convenient route rather than go out and make their own decisions and experience life the way that they want to. They rather feed off what other people are feeding them, what other people want them to, how other people want them to think, and how other people want them to live. as well through social media. And I feel like that's the most dehumanizing thing, because I recently, for like the Kendrick and Drake beef, I got Twitter back, but it also just reminded me of how dehumanizing Twitter is, because you can literally find anything on Twitter, from just news about celebrities to just funny memes, and then porn, and then people are like actually getting shot, getting killed, like fights, all of that. So I don't like the direction that social media is going in and how it influences humanity.
Yeah, child psychologists have been saying for years that it's so important, that stage of development of play, when your kids used to go outside and find ways to entertain themselves. I know I feel really blessed that for the first 17, 18 years of my life, we didn't have access to any kind of social media, any phones. We didn't even really watch movies or listen to music. It forced you to develop some imagination. We probably daydreamed a lot more than we should have, but we would come up with games. We would find ways to entertain ourselves. So when I experience reality, I think I experience it different than the kids nowadays. As a result of that, my brain had time to develop its own way of thinking that's different.
Yeah. What you said earlier about integrating play, Jordan Peterson spoke on that highly. Mm-hmm. And especially for male boys, being in school and just being cooped up in the classroom at a desk actually just goes against our nature, because you're actually not even inviting the level of play that us kids need. And I can attest to that, especially with the lowest form of autism as well, growing up, and how that affected me. And I couldn't sit still in class. Like, it was just like 100 miles per hour all the time. I had to use a stress ball or sit on the medicine balls, pause. And, yeah, that was just, it's interesting to see, because back then you don't think anything of it, but now you see how much that was a detriment to your childhood and to your development. It's not being able to be outside and play and actually have longer than an hour for recess, like constantly being out in the sun, constantly getting our body moving and learning through experience rather than just the textbooks, which I agree that we should read and that we should write, of course, but we need to balance that with more time outside and more time actually accumulating experiences that we can learn from ourselves.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Jordan Peterson talks about is how our modern school system was based off of the Prussian model of essentially producing good factory workers. So you have this entire society, entire civilization that basically decided, we didn't decide, they just decided for us that we're going to have this super rigid school structure where your child sits down in front of a desk and faces a teacher and learns respect for authority, and basically to keep quiet and be a carbon copy of the boy or girl sitting to his left and right. And if they don't adhere to that, then they're defective in some way. And if they're defective, we're going to treat them with essentially amphetamines, ADHD. So they diagnosed all these problems that children have nowadays that most people throughout all of history would say is just normal children behavior. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't remember anybody voting on that. It was just an assumption made about this is the way kids should behave. And if they don't behave like that, we're going to correct their behavior through any means necessary until we get it right.
Well, at one point in time, kids were working in factories too, which is kind of crazy. But our children are the future, though. That should be the biggest mindset going forward for anybody that not only are elders, but people that are living in the now and are immersed in their own life experiences right now, is to keep that in mind, that the children are the future and that we are the next wave of influence for our children. And the more positive influence that we can give to our children, the more positive energy that can last on earth for generations to come, because we're planting those seeds. However, one of the issues that I find with conveniency and demasculating and dehumanizing people. Like I said on Twitter, it is through our music as well. And this is a good segue to talk about the music that we have in front of us, because we have two influential albums that pretty much rap about positivity, sings about positivity, the effect of music and entertainment on children, let alone people our age and older and in between, honestly.
I think I mentioned this to you before. I was blessed in a lot of ways by not having access to music when I was a kid. Like when I turned 18, essentially, I got out on my own and I heard all the music that everyone else grew up with for the first time. And it was mind-blowing. Like I'd never heard Nirvana before. I'd heard some of the Beatles songs and stuff, and to experience that all for the first time is something pretty unique. That's why I picked this album, the Killing Me Softly.
The score is bro, that's a amazing album, bro. My dad got me hip on that because he's huge into 90s hip-hop, and that's something that he will always play in the household. So that is one of my favorite albums for sure. Because Lauryn Hill is a goddess. Yeah. She can sing, she can rap, and like just the soul behind her is just magnificent.
So when you work out, what's your do you have any go-to songs when you're trying to hit a PR or something?
Here lately, it's been Not Like Us by Kendrick for sure, because bro, that song is just insanely infectious in terms of like dancing and like gets you hype.
I don't think there's any real dispute on who won that battle
for sure.
What's your opinion about that? I don't know. Kendrick said some crazy things. Do you think it's just a diss, or do you think there's anything behind it?
I think I've always felt that it's personal, because I'm a Kendrick fan, so I've been watching the progression of this relationship and this beef boil over to what it is now. Matter of fact, Drake just dropped a feature yesterday on Sexy Red's album. Dude, the song is trash, but he did his thing a little bit,
right?
Huh?
Sexy Red?
Yeah, she's from St. Louis. But I'm not really gonna talk about Sexy Red. I'm all right. But being a Kendrick fan, it was just, we were waiting for this moment. And I'm not a Drake hater by any means, but he definitely does some weird stuff for sure. Like he definitely has weird relationships with younger girls for sure. And also he's damn near 40 years old, and he's talking about the same stuff that he did when he came into the industry. And it was just like, I don't see Kendrick. I can point out his progression through his music for sure in so many different layers. Drake, not really. Like many different styles, and his cadence changes, and he has these accents, but for the most part, I think he found a formula, and he's just gonna stick with that formula.
Hey, it's working for him.
Right, but if you are a creative person, then you're not gonna have to rely on a formula, because that's kind of what Kendrick did by taking 5 years off and then dropping Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which is, I wasn't expecting that. A lot of us weren't expecting that, but it was the music that we needed at the time, honestly. And I've gone back to that album here lately, and I appreciate it so much more, especially from like a spiritual perspective.
Two things that come to mind during that whole beef and the whole situation with Puff Daddy and stuff is, I was thinking about, what is it about being in that position with all that fame, all that power, that there's such a high percentage of people that seem to be sexually perverted in some way? And then if you read things in history about like Nero, Caligula and stuff, I think there's something about being at the very top where nobody ever contradicts you. You're essentially living in an echo chamber of people telling you that you're the best, you have access to everything. It's just like with pornography. People tend to go deeper and deeper into it. It's an addiction. And I think that lends itself to some pretty weird sexual preferences. And Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to point out is when you earlier said that, yeah, he's almost 40. That I think would be the worst thing about becoming like a superstar is there's not really an opportunity for you to develop as an individual. You end up playing a character of yourself. People expect certain type of behavior and you feel pressure to live up to that expectation. You know, maybe you're a degenerate rock star. Well, now when you get out in public, people are like expecting you to behave like that and you don't really have an opportunity to evolve or move on or anything. You see all these rock stars that, you know, like the people, a guy in Green Day, a lot of the like old 80s rock stars too. They're dressing the same. It looks so ridiculous now. They're in their 50s and 60s wearing the same clothes and the same makeup and stuff. And you're like, dude, I don't know. It's just, it's kind of cringy, but that's all they know how to do. They can't really reinvent themselves. That's something really rare is when you're famous and you can genuinely reinvent yourself.
Yeah, and that's why I like Kendrick so much because his last album was a testament to reimagining who he is and getting into touch with who he is. And that's why I love Kendrick so much because he was able to point that out with Drake as well. He was like, you're moving like a degenerate, you're moving like a child, you're not moving like a 40-year-old man should. You know, you're still talking about misogyny, you're still talking about drugs, you're still talking about all these things, especially when you didn't come from a lifestyle like that. And that is a beautiful, you know, that circles back to what we were talking about earlier is how, because he was a child actor before, because he was on Degrassi, and then he was found by Lil Wayne and Young Money, and then, you know, he is what he is today, fast forward. But it brings me back to what we were talking about earlier about development within children and also developing masculinity and building a human up rather than dehumanizing them. And it seems like when you get into the industry, especially at a young age, it doesn't allow much growth for you unless if you take the active decision to break away from the influences of the industry and the money and the power that comes with that and the illusion inevitably too as well. How that influences so many people in the world and how so many people want to be like that. How can we shift the mindset on that? Because my favorite artist of all time is Michael Jackson, but we saw what happened with him and the amount of issues that stemmed from his life and his perspective because he started his career at 5 years old. And when are we going to have the conversation and recognize the pattern, especially people in the industry, whether it be music, whether it be entertainment in general? When are we going to sit down and have that conversation and recognize the pattern of people that it has created? Whether if they've done it or not, there's no coincidence that these rumors continuously pop up for new people that get into the industry.
Yeah, I think another conversation that the U.S. especially needs to have is what responsibility do you have as a superstar to curtail your behavior or understand that you have so much influence on the younger generation, you know, with artists like Sexy Red and stuff like that. I get from their perspective, they're, you know, maybe come from no money or anything like that. And for the first time, they have a platform where they can say what they want and they have a lot of options in life, but not really taking any accountability for everything I'm saying is influencing the younger generation, especially like junior high, high school kids. Their behavior is maybe not directly based off of what I'm saying, but it definitely influences it. That's a conversation that's been brought up several times in the last 30 years. I mean, I remember listening to Eminem talk about that, but I don't know, there's no legislation and I'm not in favor of that because at the end of the day, it's freedom of speech.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
It would be nice if people in Hollywood, in the music industries, took some accountability about that.
Yeah. And that also circles back to convenience because I feel now when you haven't developed as a child and now you're swung into the industry, especially if you're talented and you found talent and you found a certain sound or a certain algorithm like Drake did, and even Michael Jackson did as well. When you find that algorithm and you start bringing this success, bringing all this money, bringing all this power and the ability to do things that normal people really can't do at all. Now that level of convenience has been amplified, but also you're still degenerate in a way. You're still not developed in a way that a human should. And how you use that convenience can be for very dark things. Like we said, like you start having these weird sexual preferences, and that we've noticed within the industry before, time and time after again. And I don't know. We need to have that conversation, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't really think it's possible to develop with the public eye on you, you know, so much scrutiny. I don't think you really evolve in the way that a person was meant to. And that's why you see it's particularly bad with people that were famous from a really young age. You know, it's already hard enough in your 20s and stuff to be more responsible, make the right choices, maybe start a family or whatever it is. That's why you see so many relationships fail. It's like a cliche in Hollywood at this point. But if you're 10, 12, 13, it's really bad because you have no foundation already and you're in the public eye. All you're concerned about is, you know, being liked, I would imagine, by the world essentially. And everyone around you is probably trying to use you. They're making money off of you. I don't know. I definitely wouldn't let my kid in that environment. Doesn't matter how much money they're throwing at them.
Especially in the state of capitalism that we're in now. You know, now we're kind of really pushing morals aside, especially in those industries, and pushing human emotion and psychology aside, and knowing, like, because there's studies out there that a lot of this is harmful to children and harmful to people in the industry to have that much attention, and it creates this persona. And that's one thing that Kendrick brought out to Drake, is that you live behind your songs and that you develop this persona. And if people aren't in agreement of this persona and aren't sold by it, then you crumble as well, because you put and invested all your time and energy into that persona. So it's like, what can we do to tell our children not to develop a certain persona, but embody the fact that we're constantly changing and that we're constantly being in an environment that is always changing as well. And if we rely on a certain persona or a certain mask that we put on, then we're going to be doomed.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. This is the most I've thought or talked about Hollywood or the music industry in a long time. To me, I don't really care about those people anymore. Yeah. I think they're overhyped. Most of them are just not impressive people. Nothing you'd want to emulate. You know, I don't understand America's obsession with them.
But I mean, and like, because they're influential and they're also influencing that lifestyle and also even their traumas on regular kids that, you know, just listen to their music or pay attention to, you know, whatever they do in the entertainment industry.
And I think they should stick to the entertainment, you know, world. Yeah. That's one thing that really bothers me, is when people in Hollywood have the audacity to go and talk about social, political issues without any, you know, research or backing up what they're saying. And people really want to hear their opinion. Like, who cares?
That's true.
You know, ask a random person on the street and it's just as valid, can't stand that word, but as any one of theirs. You know, this is an election year. I can promise you in the next 9 months or so, they're going to roll out all the Hollywood stars they can to, you know, back their candidate. I can't imagine which candidate that's going to be, but yeah, I don't know. That stuff just really bothers me. Who cares about these people? Stop giving them power.
For sure. Because, like, back to what we were saying, is there's more negative influence coming from that source than it is positive. You know, I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about how black trauma is constantly being brought up in Hollywood movies rather than Black empowerment. And that's one of the biggest things in which I'm like, bro, we got to stop looking towards movies to give us empowerment and find it ourselves. Do I think it's wrong that we don't have as much Black empowerment movies compared to Black trauma movies? Of course. But that means we have to make our own, and we don't have to rely on the powers of the industry to aid that anymore. Just do it. And, that's a path that I'm taking, is the unconventional path of making my own movies and making my own music and not having to rely on the powers that be, quote unquote, that I know are only going to want me to push my music out for negative means or just for financial reasons. And I don't want that.
Yeah, that's what's so good about platforms like this and the internet nowadays, is it gives a voice to just people outside of this industry to talk about the things they're interested in. I can tell you though, I would never want my kids to think of themselves as a victim. I don't think that's a healthy thing to push. You brought up movies though earlier, so I wanted to ask you, because I was listening to your other podcast. What's your top directors? And
top
why?
Directors? Stanley Kubrick is like at the top, for sure. And then I love Christopher Nolan. You brought up sci-fi. One of my favorite movies is Interstellar.
Yeah.
Just
great
cinematography, the acting, the score, the overall story as well was just captivating, bro. Like, I love it.
That scene with Matthew McConaughey watching his kids grow up. Yeah. Just
insane.
In video format. That really hit me.
And only like 2 years passed for him.
No, it was like 30 minutes or something, and he sees his kid's entire life that he missed out on. That was that pulled on some heartstrings for sure.
For sure.
So you said Stanley Kubrick. I heard in one of your other podcasts that you recently watched Clockwork Orange. You were talking about that.
Yeah, so I've seen it before, but a couple of months ago, I recently went back to it. And I love movies like that are willing to break boundaries, because that movie definitely has a couple of scenes that are a little intense for sure, but it's raw as well, and also it's showing that dystopian type of reality. And I like movies that are warning towards that are foreshadowing it, and they do it in a creative type of way, because the whole dialogue. What was the main character's name again?
Alex. Yeah,
Alex. The whole dialogue in the manner that he spoke in and the slang that he used was like, it was off-putting, but it was interesting, and it was just overall added to the whole weirdness of the movie perfectly.
Yeah, so Clockwork Orange was really the first movie to popularize the elegant psychopath archetype, where you have a character who's crazy, a murderer usually, in his case, a murderer and other stuff, but has some redeeming quality where he's either so smart or so likable somehow. In Alex's case, he's just very articulate, intelligent, that you're kind of rooting for him. You're not really sure. Another example of this, there's been many repeats.
He's charming.
Yeah, Breaking Bad is a good example where they have sort of a twist on that. There's been a lot of movies over the last 30 years or so since Clockwork Orange came out that follow the same archetype. But yeah, you mentioned what makes Clockwork Orange really interesting is the slang they use. So when it was developed, they thought about, they're essentially a gang, of 17-year-olds. They wanted to come up with some slang, but they realized that any slang they came up with would sound corny in 10 years because, every 5 years they're coming up with new slang. So if they just use the slang from, when did it come out? The 70s or 80s? I think it was the 70s.
It came out in 78 or something like that.
So imagine hearing it nowadays and they're using the slang words from the 70s. It would sound really corny. So what they thought they'd do instead is create an entire new form of slang called, I forgot what it's called. It starts with an N, But basically, it's a mix of Russian, which is very transgressive, especially back then.
We were talking about that before, yeah.
Russia was the enemy. That's why they use a lot of even Russian slang words, devotchka. Even they take words like God and substitute it for bog, stuff like that. And it gives it its own, like, you can still understand what they're saying, even though they've changed English a little bit. But yeah, big fan of that movie, man.
Yeah, that movie's great. And it captivates the main, like the hidden meaning of dehumanizing man in a way. Yeah. And seeing if forcing good upon a bad man is morally good and to like human thought. Not human thought, but like human standards.
Is it about the intention behind it, or is it just about the behavior?
Right.
If they can force bad people to do things, in this case through conditioning, sort of like Pavlov's dog, just pain and pleasure conditioning, is it really good behavior? Do we have the ability, or not so much ability, but the right to interfere with a person's mind? You know, now that we understand the brain better, should that be allowed? Those are questions that the movie doesn't even really answer in the end, but it raises a question. And good movies at the end of the day don't really give you an answer. They just raise the question.
It definitely rose the question, because at the end, he returned back to his original nature. So it made you think that even though we can try to artificially create a certain mindset within people, does it fully disconnect them from their original human nature? And I think that that's an interesting question, because that whole ending scene was kind of just like a cliffhanger psychologically, and kept you thinking, like, did he win? Did he lose? Like, is he in a position that is common, that's just repetitive torture, or does he always prevail no matter how many times they try to?
You know, interestingly, so the book actually is a little bit different than the movie.
Yes.
In that there was an extra chapter, and they took it out because they thought that it wouldn't appeal to American audiences.
He did the same with The Shining too, didn't he?
I know he changed a couple things in The Shining. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another really great movie.
Yeah, Stephen King
He didn't like it at all. Yeah. Where in the book, in the last chapter, the 22nd chapter, he basically grows up. You know, he just doesn't find those things appealing anymore. And that was kind of one of the messages: is it's easy when you're young to destroy. It's, you know, violence is easy, but to actually create something is it takes a lot more time and maturity. And that's kind of the nature of youth, is they just want to burn the world to the ground kind of thing. So yeah, that's really interesting. Do you watch any horror movies?
I'm not really a horror movie guy. Not because I scare easily, because I don't. I don't know. I think a lot of them are fitting the type of cliche, but I do love A24 movies. I love what they do with horror movies. So like Midsommar, and Hereditary.
That's a great movie.
Hereditary is crazy.
I love the filming. For me,
Yeah.
It's not that it's so scary. It's just like these scenes they create are incredible. Have you ever watched Old Boy?
Man, you are like the 10th person to tell me to watch that movie.
That director is amazing.
Yeah, the original, it's Korean, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get on that for sure.
Man. Both the American and the Korean version are very good.
Yeah,
I don't want to ruin it, but yeah.
No.
Watch it.
Yeah, essentially, you were just telling me how he woke up in a room without any knowledge of where he's been or what's happened before.
Yeah, Josh Brolin plays him. He wakes up in a motel room, no idea how he got there, and it's a prison. So no explanation given. He's fed the same food every single day. It's something like 16 years, and then they just gas the room one day, and he wakes up outside of it, and he's trying to figure out why they did this to him, and that's what the movie's about.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to lock into that for sure. I'll probably watch the Korean version. Is that the first version?
Yeah,
that's the original. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to lock into that.
To me, the movies that are like quote unquote scary aren't so much like Midsommar or Hereditary. Have you ever seen Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah, I haven't watched the whole movie, but I know that it deals heavily on drugs. I know one of the Wayans brothers are in it.
Just the camera angles, yeah,
and also like the tone, the whole color palette is just like very
unique.
Yeah, it's unique, but also it sets the tone for the movie as like dark and anxiety driven too. It feels like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You really feel what the characters are feeling the whole time.
For sure.
With their addiction and just how severe it becomes and how much it messes up their lives, and how they always say drugs and the only endings are, death, insane asylums, or prison. And all the characters in the movie end up in one of those situations. I never asked you this before, but are you a big history fan?
I love history. That was my favorite subject. It's super important to learn history too, because especially now we try to tuck history to the side, especially if it was driven on negativity and driven on harm. A perfect example is Nazi Germany. A lot of people stray away from talking about that, but if we don't talk about it, that history is bound to repeat itself, and it could even be repeating itself right in front of us right now.
I think there's a lot of parallels between Germany in the late 30s and our world nowadays. You almost get in trouble talking about that stuff nowadays.
For sure.
And that's one of the examples. The very fact that you can't talk about a lot of that stuff. Do you have any time periods in history that are particularly interesting?
Bro, my favorite time to learn about in terms of history in school was the beginning of the 1900s. Anything after the Civil War and Reconstruction, because the Civil War, especially being a part of the Black community too, it's kind of just thrown at you all the time. So if anything, it was just like, I've heard this story so many times through so many different lenses and perspectives. It kind of just got old because it's just shoved down our throats a lot of the time. But after that, when we're creating the Federal Reserve and World War I and the Great Depression, World War II especially, and then everything up to the modern age, that's what really sold me. Like I was 1900s pretty much to now, because how fast we progressed as a civilization during this last century and how fast we've done it in the last 20 years is insane to me. So it's just jam-packed with so much stuff going on. And the Cold War has so many moving parts to it that just, it was more of a war built on psychological fear, propaganda, and shaping the way that people think and their perspective more than gunfire.
Yeah.
That's what makes it even more interesting.
Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. And I think that's a really good analogy, that things don't happen the same way.
Who said that again?
Mark Twain.
Okay.
But the same types of human behavior play themselves out time and time again. And when you read history, it's hard to not notice that. Interestingly, about the time period that you were referring to after the Civil War, if you make a list of the 100 richest people that ever lived in history, 18 of them, I believe, were born in the same 5 to 10 year period in the U.S. They were all 18, I think it was like 15 years after the Civil War. If you think about like John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, a lot of people like that, there's one very unique time period in history where the industrial age took off and there was so much opportunity.
But also the formation of banks here as well. Yeah. And
Federal Reserve.
And, turning capitalism into like a machine in a way, which inevitably why I love the Cold War so much is just like they're using, it's two political structures going against each other, and nothing really popped off for real in terms of like a world war or a huge war. Like you had these little proxy wars, but it was just like I don't know. It was interesting to see that. It was a different approach to war than anything that we've seen before, honestly.
Yeah, for me, I guess I'm most interested in ancient history.
Yeah.
Just incredible people that lived.
I am too.
Great generals, great battles. Second Punic War, just that death struggle between Carthage and Rome. Hannibal, and what a genius he was, and how he defeated the Romans 3 times in devastating battles. And the last time, if you go to West Point, you're required to study the Battle of Cannae. It was such a work of art, the encirclement of a larger army by a smaller army. And, I could get into the details of it, but almost 80,000 Romans. I think there was 3,000 survivors. Killing that many people by hand, it took all day. And it's just how it was done was insane. And if you think about it, at that point, if Hannibal had made the decision to sack Rome, we probably wouldn't be speaking English right now. The course of history would have completely changed. There was some things that went on. He didn't think he had the manpower after that intense of a battle to take the city. He asked for reinforcements. There was some political stuff, but yeah, would have completely changed history. And as soon as they gave Rome a chance to recover, that's what made the Romans so unique, was their martial military mindset. They didn't believe they were defeated no matter what happened. Under any other circumstance, any other civilization, they destroyed all 3 armies they could come up with, and they didn't have really any troops left in the field. They would have settled for some surrender, under whatever terms the enemy gave them. But Rome was like, no, doesn't matter. And that ultimately was the thing that turned the tide and caused Rome to win instead of Carthage.
I'm sure you heard the memes of why men love the Roman Empire so much and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember when that came out.
Yeah,
I think about it a lot.
Dude, I love ancient history a lot. I love it a lot. It was just in school that I was more focused on modern history. But here lately, I've definitely delved into ancient history on a different accord, because I know he who writes history is only the winner. And there are certain pieces of history where I feel like we've wrote a different story than it actually happened. So that's why I'm kind of in terms of ancient history, I'm a little off-putting in terms of how school approaches it. I love that history. It's just how it's been approached to me in the way that I've approached it back in schooling. But doing my own research, I've definitely found a lot more traction towards that.
Genghis Khan is another one that's really interesting to me. Just there was so many tribes in the area, of Mongolia, the Merkids, there was a lot of different tribes that essentially had the same characteristics. What made this one random group take over the entire world? They conquered more land than anybody else in history. Just one really dynamic, really interesting person, the impact they can have on history.
For sure. And also a population too.
Oh
yeah. I'm big into the start of humanity. I love that question. How do we get our start? I don't believe that we evolved from monkeys. I'm not in tune with that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Have you ever heard of the Bronze Age collapse?
Explain.
So we know that civilizations had developed. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, there was one other group.
I love Egypt too. Babylonians?
Yeah, the Babylonians, were kind of new on the scene, but for some unknown reason, maybe a variety of reasons, it all died out. And then modern history as we know it started.
Are you talking about Mesopotamia and all that too as well?
Yeah, but even before then, everything we know about history happened pretty much after the Bronze Age collapse, and we don't really know why it all fell apart. We know they were an incredibly advanced society, or several societies. There's a couple tablets in Egypt they found that refer to a group called the Sea People, just this mysterious sort of boogeyman that
Atlantis,
right? Well, actually, that's one of the speculations, is that this group of unknown people that took out the Egyptians. And
who wrote that story that was part of Greece about Atlantis? Who wrote it again?
Well, the person to refer to Atlantis originally was Socrates.
Socrates?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Because I think Pluto made a story about Atlantis. You know what? I'm going to go to Google on this because I'm going to be stumped if
it
I
might have been
get
Plato, but I believe it was Socrates. Another really interesting dude. I don't think he talked about it in the Iliad or the Odyssey, but in some other writings.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out because I know he... Plato's account of Atlantis. Yeah, Plato in books goes into great detail about the magnificence.
Oh, it was Plato?
Yeah.
Okay.
About the ancient metropolis, which suggests that the Atlanteans were very wealthy, perhaps from the fruits of a prosperous. I don't know why I can't talk today. Yeah. Prosperous trade. That's weird.
You know, one of the things that I was going to make my major in school was sociology, because one of the most interesting parts about history is the different ways human beings have chosen to live together. You know, on the extreme sides of it, we have like the Spartans, Bushido, you know, Japanese feudalism, stuff like that. Just these very extreme societies, and the fact that they worked at all, you know. If you really do some research into the Spartans, for example, or some of the other Greek city-states, the Thebans, the Macedonians, it's hard to imagine from our culture, our society, being able to operate like that.
Oh, for sure. Especially in the way that we're kind of brainwashed too as well.
Well, you know, I think everybody was brainwashed. They were just brainwashed in a different way, you know?
Yeah.
If you think about it, that's the thing about words like that, is they're kind of slippery. What does brainwashing mean? You know,
MK Ultra.
Yeah, well, unless they're like Clockwork Orange strapping you down and forcing you to watch something, it's just whatever you hear since you're a kid, you're going to assume to be true.
That's true.
The methodology, you know, we're Americans, we're better than everyone else, whatever it is, we're Greeks, we're Chinese. You know, when I was younger, I told you I spent a couple of years in China, and I used to argue with my tutor all the time because she was obviously very pro-China. And she used to give me all these crazy stories about, like there was one called Mao Zedong Could Not Tell a Lie. And it was like play for play, the story of Abraham Lincoln and how, you know, that we have. And I was trying to explain to her, like, you know, you guys took that story from us, right? She was like, no, y'all took it from us. I was like, listen, our guy lived like 100 years before yours, so you definitely stole that from us.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, China is a weird little weird situation for sure.
Especially recently, man. There's some crazy stuff happening. China's in quite a situation. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I think if the world does end through some sort of third world war, it would most likely start in the South China Sea.
Yeah, with Taiwan and everything.
China doesn't have a lot of options now. The economic situation they're in doesn't leave them a lot of options other than securing the, Taiwan market, like the microchip market. They produce over 90% of the microchips in the world. They need that. China has a saying, we have to grow rich before we grow old. Their population is aging so
Didn't
rapidly.
Mao say that?
It might have been Mao or Xi.
Yeah.
But yeah, they in the next 10 years, they're going to have too many old people essentially because of their one-child law that their economy
did talk
can't
about
sustain.
this too.
Yeah. So, just like a dying man is going to try anything, they have nothing to lose at this point. So from our perspective, we're like, oh, China wouldn't do that. You know, we would come and intervene. But that's assuming that the people making those decisions are rational actors that wouldn't take risks like that. You got to think some of these guys are dying, like Putin. They're old.
Yeah.
If they genuinely didn't care about the rest of the world, they're sociopaths. Let's just say hypothetically, they have nothing to lose personally, so it's kind of a scary situation if you think about it. Like, of course, if there was a nuclear war, everyone would die, But once again, that's as a rational person would think.
Yeah. Interesting situation. And that's why I'm very nitpicky with the perspective of that story being told, because I know some people lie about it, especially with the way that media is built today. It's just super. It's crazy. Like, what do you think about it?
About what?
Media today. And that the structure of media today, because I think we're more built on propaganda than truth now.
Well, it's always been like that, but
Yeah.
for the first time, I think people are really recognizing the clear and present bias that news channels have, and they're really getting sick of it. I don't think there's as many people that turn on the news at night and listen to what they say and like, oh, guess that's the way it is.
That's why independent entities in general are just rising right now. That's why you can look at Joe Rogan's podcast and see that it's gotten as big as it has, because he has tried to stay neutral in the best way possible. You know, obviously he's going to have his opinions, which every human being has, but he has brought in so many neutral guests
or different perspectives.
Yes.
At least just the attempt to stay unbiased is more than most news channels from Fox to CNN do, where it's just so clear that they have a bias, and it doesn't matter what the situation is, they're going to support their team no matter what. Not to mention, we understand more now that those news companies are funded by, corporate interests, and they're going to represent those corporate interests, whether it's big pharma or oil or whatever else.
Six companies own 96% of media outlets.
And, that's one of the major problems that's developing with capitalism, because don't get me wrong, I support capitalism, but what's happening is, if you look at the 1970s and the 1980s compared to nowadays, there's not as much competition. A lot, whether it's cars or, media, pharmaceuticals, there's not many companies vying for control. And then whoever can produce the best product, they win. It's more and more of these little monopolies of 2 or 3 companies, and that gives them a lot more leverage to be able to set the prices they want. There's not alternatives, which fundamentally is what capitalism is about. The best product will win because people will buy it.
That's where we lean into authoritarianism as well, and also how corporations can be in cahoots with governments. And also we talked about how certain corporations and certain companies are more powerful and more influential than governments themselves. Google is insane. Like Apple has trillions of dollars to their disposal. So it's like seeing what especially big tech has done is incredible.
That's what's so sketchy about them taking a one side or the other on the political side. Yeah. If they filter out information against the party that they don't support, well, that affects billions of people. Literally, you can literally affect elections, do all kinds of stuff. And there's not legislation for these things because it's so new, but there definitely should be. I'm gonna use the restroom real fast.
We're back. Hey, so we're talking about corporations, government influence, and where that leads, how that leads to authoritarianism. And like what we brought up earlier, the reflections of Nazi Germany and today. I kind of want you to, what are the things that you peeve?
Well, let me say that I think that any form of government, it's just like nature. It heads towards entropy. Any form of government is going to head towards totalitarianism, the consolidation of power. People with power in any government are going to want to accumulate more power. Whether you have, it's just that certain governments, certain political systems are better about preventing that accumulation of power too quickly. Communism, for example, historically speaking, very bad. Yeah. It took about 3 years for a select handful of people to have all the power and everyone else to have none, and none of the wealth. Distribution of wealth and power. Capitalism,
the bigotry was crazy too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the lower class, what were they called again?
Like the serfs, oh, you mean in communism?
Yeah, in communism in Russia. What were the people that they demonized?
Oh, I don't know what they called them, but essentially it was anyone who owned land.
Yeah.
You know, there's always, in order for a political system to take hold, there has to be the boogeyman. So there's the people that are the cause of the problems, whether it's the Jews in Nazi Germany or the landowners in Stalinist Russia. And those are the sort, if we could just get rid of those people, everything would be heaven on earth. And, you know, that's what they did. They literally went in there and confiscated hardworking people's property, killed a lot of them. We're talking in the millions.
Yeah, 50 to 70 million. That's what Stalin killed.
Yeah.
Mao killed like 150.
Yeah, they're not even really sure the exact numbers. I think it's something like 60 million in China. They had the Great Leap Forward, the idiots making decisions about stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that they came up with at one point, they didn't want sparrows. So they had everyone kill the sparrows, which caused a chain reaction that caused a famine. They wanted China to be a great producer of steel. So they took a lot of the farmers out and essentially caused a famine that killed in the tens of millions of people. They had these gang of youths. There was Red Chengdu and 26 August, who essentially were empowered, you know, teenagers empowered to do whatever they want with impunity. You didn't like your teacher? Call them a capitalist. You know, tar and feather them, drag them through the street, beat them publicly, beat them to death, no consequences. They even gave them weapons because Mao said it's been too long since we've had a war. The youth need to practice battle. So you have these gangs that were given weapons by the government to just fight each other for no reason. They're not gaining land or anything, just cause.
Yeah, the social credit score doesn't add to any type of peace or any positive influence.
That thing's scary.
Well. That thing is.
And China, you understand, has more facial recognition cameras than anywhere else on Earth. So you can be in Shanghai right now. You can jaywalk, and it will catch your face and lower your credit score.
Yeah, and it will replay what you did wrong and invite public shame. If
your score goes too low, your face will be posted on billboards in movie theaters before the movie starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Crazy. The fact that people accept that because they're so used to that control from a government.
Yeah, and it's so like, and it is crazy how other leaders kind of praise it too as well. But they talk about how society there and the culture there has been on good behavior. But like we were talking about with Clockwork Orange, is like, that's being forced and that's being manufactured. That's not real human nature. That is manufactured. And also beaten by fear of breaking that code as well. And I can't imagine, like, we talk about the generation coming into America today. I can't imagine the generation that is coming out over in China as well, and just how manufactured they are to think a certain way. And I mean, it's the same here, but the different ways that an American, especially in the youth, will think compared to the Chinese youth today is just so polarizing, because TikTok is a beautiful example of that. Like the TikTok that they have over there is super pro-government. It's uplifting people to be a part of the government, to listen to the government, when here it's just ridiculousness. Like, you don't know what to expect on there.
I think I just noticed certain patterns of behavior.
Yeah.
Coming from my background, you know, I grew up in a super religious group. I guess you'd have to call it a cult. It's literally a cult.
You were telling me about that.
They
what were they called?
The Children of God. Originally, they had to rebrand themselves several times because they just got a lot of negative publicity.
Yeah.
So the Children of God, then the Family International.
The Family sounds such like a toxic group.
Yeah. But they have certain characteristics, any cult or any like government like that. Like I said, they need certain words to describe things. There's us. You need to create an us versus them mentality. Like in our case, we had systemites, the word for everyone outside of the group. I was raised to believe that you and everyone else in the world was a systemite, part of the system. It was founded by hippies. So, you were all going to hell. The world was going to end. It was a doomsday cult. So they have, that's how they motivate people. There's that and social pressure too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I noticed a lot of those same characteristics. You have words to describe the bad people. In China, it was capitalist. And the thing about those words, when you give power to words, you don't need to provide evidence. You can call someone a capitalist pig.
But don't they have like a certain version of capitalism too?
Oh, you're talking about China nowadays? Yeah. I'm just talking about the characteristics of a society that's falling apart, that isn't based off of reason anymore. You give words power, and then you can attach them to people. And that's happening in the US too. Can you think of any words that you can attach to someone on social media that makes them seem bad? Because I can think of several.
That makes them seem bad?
Yeah, if I were to call you...
Give me an example.
Well, say I were to call you a racist, for example.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Say I were to call you a bigot, or, words like hate speech, stuff like that. I don't need to prove any of that. I can just call you it, and that has a certain power to it. Just like in China, you could call someone a capitalist. You could call them part of the bourgeoisie. That's a dangerous place to be because there's no reason behind it. When you can make accusations and that has a real tangible effect on people's life without providing any evidence, that's a tribal place to be at.
That's super tribalism as well.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch on that you brought up in terms of like cults is the occult as well. Because during my path of mysticism is the story of truth, and learning that and understanding that you can find truth anywhere. It's in so many different places. It's not just designated towards one way of living. That's why we call it the pathless path, because there's so many different ways to reach home, to reach the same destination that we're all looking for, but there's so many different paths to go there. That's why we have to forge our own. One thing I've seen is that spirituality is not inherently good. Spirituality is neutral. Spirituality can be used for good reasons, but it also can be used for negative reasons, because truth isn't confined to just good or bad. It's beyond duality. You find truth everywhere. There's truth in evil and there's truth in good. But inherently, if you're tied to, like, closely connected to who you are as a human being, then you're more driven to do good things and build and constantly create. That's at least when we're in touch with our true nature. One thing I've learned about people that do live today, secret societies, and also the occult back then, and how it corresponded with civilizations back then, Nazi Germany being one of them as well.
They were obsessed with the occult, right?
Yeah, upset because the symbol, the swastika, that people don't know this, is actually found in every single religion.
If you were to go to Nepal today, they have the swastika out there. Yeah. It means something completely different. Yeah,
it's in India. It's in early Christianity as well. It's found in Buddhism. It's just inverted and tilted on its axis. They took a power symbol and tilted it and changed it and tweaked it to mean something completely different.
The perversion of something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to learn about that too, because I'm an inherently good person and I like to expand upon that. I'm not perfect by any means, but again, back to what I said earlier, if we don't learn about even the negative things, they're bound to happen again, and they can happen right in front of us, and we just don't know. So that's why I feel it's so important to learn both sides of the story.
Speaking of that, in the 1960s and 70s, they did a experiment because they wanted to know, after the atrocities committed in Nazi Germany, it wasn't like Hitler and Goebbels and that little group were doing all these things. These were massive operations. They took millions of people. Yeah. To literally put the bullet in that person's head, put them in the gas chamber. How could you get a group of, you remember Berlin was the center of science, of seemingly educated people to commit genocide. Is the average person walking around, do they have that potential?
Yeah.
So they did a test. They invited people to come to an experiment. And basically they said, you're going to sit here, your job is to administer an electric shock to this other person if they answer the questions wrong. Every time they answer it wrong and you administer the shock, the electricity, the voltage will go up a little bit. And the highest level would literally like kill someone. What they didn't know is the other person was in on it and they're not actually shocking them. So they would get the question wrong, they shock it, they shock the person, and the voltage would increase. It'd get to the point where the other person would be like, I don't want to continue anymore. I don't want to do this. And the person directing it would tell the person that was the real experiment, no, continue. They were allowed to give them 2 prompts. Continue. If the person said, I don't want to, they would say, please continue. That's all they were allowed to say. And 92% of people, we're talking grandmothers, just average people, would continue to torture a person that hasn't done anything wrong, that's asking for them to stop. That's a crazy thought when you think about it, that the potential to, cause physical damage to another person is there. They realized that it was the authority. If they gave the person a way to not take accountability themselves and say, listen, I'm taking responsibility for this. You just press the actual button. You're not making the decision. You're just the trigger man. Then people would do it. As soon as they changed aspects of the experiment, like the person directing it would wear a doctor's coat. So they had some authority in the minds of the people. As soon as they switched that out, like they moved it out of a legitimate medical facility to some sketchy building, that dropped the compliance rate down to like 70-something%. And once the guy took off the doctor's coat and just wore regular clothes, it dropped it down again. So as long as people thought that, oh, well, he's taking responsibility for this, I'm just pressing the button. 92% were willing to cause physical harm to someone that had done nothing wrong.
That's interesting. And also that points back to convenience and how convenience can cause us to point the finger at other people and lose a touch of accountability in life, because it comes from a different source, especially people that find convenience in religion rather than, I'm not even going to say saving, growth. There's some people out there that use religion to have this certain thought that they can commit sin, and then when they pray or that they say God got them, then like it's washed away, but they continue their nature of doing bad because they find religion or God as a convenience rather than a path to find accountability within themselves. So that was interesting that you brought that up and noticing that correlation.
There definitely are people out there with religion that use it to excuse their bad behavior.
Yes.
At the same time, though, I think religion historically has been more of a cause for good. You know, it says in the Bible, the law is for the lawless. You have to have reasons to do good for the average person. Nietzsche just talked about this a lot. If there wasn't a God, it would be necessary to invent him. The average person out there is not just going to do good for good's sake. And he predicted that as mankind got to the point where they were a lot more atheistic and didn't have some foundational religion, then there would have to be something that took the place of that. He thought it would be like political ideologies. And sure enough, communism, Nazi, fascism, stuff like that took the place. And, there was no foundational morality in any of those systems. And we haven't seen slaughter on the scale that we've seen it in the last 100 years throughout most of history.
Yeah. Because that's one thing that China has said before, is that to get rid of this notion of God, you have to replace God in a way and replace it with authoritarianism, and constantly being at their neck and reminding them through propaganda that this is the way to live, and that I am superior and that I have to think for you.
Yeah, just look at North Korea now. The Kim cult, it's literally like they worship him like a god.
Yeah, it's insane.
His pictures are everywhere. They talk about him like a supernatural being. It seems silly to us, but essentially that's what they're doing. They have a godhead in their society and they're told that he literally doesn't poop. Crazy stuff. And yeah, they're replacing that man's inherent need to believe in some higher power, some reason behind all of this. Like, why should we do right versus wrong? That's not something that I've never heard a good explanation for. Is if you're an atheist, for example, why wouldn't you do wrong as long as you can get away with it? Can you think of any reason? Why wouldn't you commit rape, murder, anything else? If there is no higher power or no inherent right or wrong, then it's just whatever makes you happy, right?
Yeah.
That's a really dangerous idea that I hear pushed more and more nowadays is you should live your true self, whatever makes you happy. Live your truth. You know.
Oh yeah.
I was born this way. Type
Totally focused on the subjective.
Whatever your nature
objective.
is, you should live that truth. Yeah. It's kind of the opposite of Judeo-Christian, morality, that you should try to gain control over your baser instincts, whether it's sexual or otherwise. Because unfortunately, the truth is a lot of people's true nature is not good. You think Ted Bundy was living his truth?
I think too. It's like, I can find the word for this too. Continue. I lost it there for a minute. My bad.
No, I think that each person, and part of being a man, to bring it back to the masculinity thing, is getting control over your baser instincts. Whether it's gluttony or your sex drive or anything else. If you have, something negative in you that's telling you to do this, or it's an inappropriate time, or even it's just a small thing, that you should think of your flesh, your biological instincts, as something that's not inherently your true nature. You're a spirit outside of a physical being. And that part of growing as a person is understanding that and getting better control over it. If you just let the animal in you do whatever you want, then in a lot of cases that's really negative. You cheat on your significant other because you have the opportunity to. That's living your true self. That's living your happiness. And I see this ideology pushed more and more nowadays, and I don't think it's a positive thing. I don't think it's bearing good results in our society.
Well, I also think is that whenever you get into just totally giving into that subjective truth and pushing away objective truth, now you're inviting a life of chaos, a life of no boundaries. And yes, we're always in a state of flux, and life is always changing by every second, but it's not change that is necessary. It's constantly changing because I think it's built more on insecurity now, because you don't want to be viewed a certain way. You want to stand in your own truth, and objectivity is kind of just like, you wouldn't be a full free spirit and do your own thing without any moral code or any code at all trying to dictate your path. And that's one thing why religion and spirituality in general and mysticism have been very, very good to me and very, very good to many other people, because it's a guide, it's a tool to bring us closer to that God within, that inherent good nature, and something to stand for. When we're totally focused on our subjective nature and not an objective nature, when it's hard for us to come together as a people, and we're just built on individuality to the point where it's like we're so different we don't want to have any type of similarities, and we're pushed away from civilization in a way and just doing our old thing all the time. But also it's just not keeping us accountable and not having a good compass on us as well.
I think that through most of human history, you didn't have access to a lot of information. If you grew up in, Iowa in the late 1800s, you knew the people in your little town. They probably thought like you did. They believed like you did. That you probably believed in Christianity or whatever church you went to, and some foundational beliefs about morality. And for the first time in history, we have access to infinite different points of view through this device. And the main result of that has been this idea that, it's all subjective. And I think that is a big mistake. Best way I can describe it is truth is very complex, but it's not completely subjective.
Yeah.
The best analogy I can use is the blind man and the elephant. 6 blind men were asked to describe an elephant. They've been blind since birth. The first guy walks up to it and he fills the side and he said, an elephant's like a wall. The other guy walks up and he grabs a tusk and he's like, no, you're wrong. It's more like a spear. The other guy grabs the tail. He's like, you're both wrong. It's like a rope. Truth is the elephant. It's much bigger than any one of those descriptions, but each of those descriptions is accurate in its own right. So you have different people throughout all of history and all of our culture nowadays describing different aspects of this massive thing called truth. So they're getting together and talking, and they're like, well, I guess there is no, your truth is just as valid as mine. There is no inherent truth. 2 + 2 doesn't necessarily equal 4. When in reality, there is a actual thing called an elephant. It's just much bigger and more complex than any one of those descriptions. Truth is nuanced and large, but it's not subjective.
Yes, and that brings me to a story of the Buddhist monk and the chariot, and describing that to the king, and describing that nothing is inherently individual. There's no such thing as pure individuality, because everything is attached. All strings, all webs are attached to each other, and that everything is dependent upon each other. There we go. That's a better way. And he was very trivial with the king, and he said, if you take apart a chariot, can you tell me where the chariot is? If you take it apart piece by piece, is it found in the wheel? Is it found in the tools to steer it? Is it found in the seat? And he said, like what you were saying, like, you can describe the elephant in so many different ways by certain parts, but it's so much bigger than that. It's all those parts together that makes the chariot. And that's the truth is not found in just one individual, but it's in the combination of all of it. Yeah. To come together. So that kind of just puts a damper on total worldview total worldview based on your subjective nature, because truth is objective. Truth is not subjective.
A lot of the wars throughout history have been fought over these different ideologies. Yeah. About different people disagreeing over different aspects of truth, and not understanding that you might be able to reconcile both those two ideas together.
There's too much ego in the way, for sure. And that brings me to my music choice. It was Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, made in the 70s during the time of the Cold War. And there was a lot of unpredictability in the air. Nobody knew what the next few years were going to look like, because the possibility of a world war was always imminent. So he basically wrote an album that he told Smokey Robinson was, he didn't write it, that God wrote it. And it was kind of just a reminder that the inherent truth is love, and how love is only going to bring us together, and how we can only advance as a civilization, let alone as an individual, through love. And I think he just wrote that to serve as a reminder, especially during times like that. So
I like that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful album. Wonderful album.
I've heard certain songs off of it. I've never heard the entire album.
Yeah, bro.
Borrow it sometime.
Definitely take the time. Like, if you have one of those days where you're just chilling at home, not doing anything, just listen to the album. It's not a super long listen at all. But it gives you a lot more faith and a lot more hope in yourself and in human nature too, as well.
Side note, we got to get a group together to go see Deadpool Wolverine.
Yeah, true.
Speaking of movies, man, that's the only movie I care about right now.
Yeah.
Been waiting my entire life for that.
Yeah, we can talk about the inherent nature of Disney right now and how it's destroying Marvel.
I love that South Park episode about it.
What happened?
Pandaverse. Like pandering. Oh. Oh man, you got to see it. It's so good.
Yeah, bro. I'm very excited to see Deadpool. So, but I know you got to get out here soon. there's many more conversations to come later
Yes,
on
sir.
in the future, because I know you have a lot of things to talk about. I didn't feel on the top of my game today, so I definitely have a lot more in store and a lot more that I would like to talk about. But is there any closing thoughts? Is there any anything that you want the audience to focus on in terms of your journey? Like, do you have anything going on your part? How can we reach you? How can we get in tune with what's going on in your life?
Well, as far as closing thoughts, I will say that I think things like this, if there is going to be a de-escalation in the world, it's people coming together and sharing viewpoints, understanding that you can disagree with people and still, come to some respect and understanding.
Yeah.
And I think the internet is, despite all the negative parts of it, that's one of the really beautiful and positive things, is it creates the opportunity for that discussion. As far as reaching me, if you guys are interested in hiring a personal trainer, check out my Instagram, finalformfitness_ between each word. Or come to Edge Fitness and find me. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So, just a reminder, Mine is a vessel, is a system being put in place to help transcend human consciousness worldwide, bring us back into our inherent nature of God living within us, of the divine truth that lives within all of us. And we find it not only through individuality, like we said, and that there is truth and subjective truth, but there's also truth in coming together and sharing not only our perspectives, but agreeing on certain things. And that's how truth should be tackled. It should be balanced through the paradox of subjective truth and objective truth living together, and through conversations like these, and how we can grow and learn from each other, and set the standard, not the standard, but set the foundation for new knowledge and new learning curves for us. So without further ado, it was a pleasure to have you on, and I hope everybody is having a great day. Anything else from you?
No, just glad to be here, man.
Yes, sir.
I'm glad we did this.
Yes, sir. Part 2 is definitely going to come into the future, but other than that, I hope y'all have a great day. Hey, thank you for staying after the YouTube video. Be sure to like, comment. It's important to share your voice, and subscribe to my channel. There should be a video on the screen. If not, then there's something wrong. But follow me on social media, Instagram, X, whatever it may be. Also, check out my blog in the description box below. Other than that, my name is Houston. I hope you have a great day. Namaste.